Jeff Bezos said one day, "We innovate by starting with the customer and working backwards. That becomes the touchstone for how we invent." And in today's episode, I want us to deep dive into the industry that Hyliion is poised to disrupt. Try to understand the market, the key players, the expectations and challenges around it. So once again, sit down, relax, and let's deep dive into Hyliion. Hyliion, or ticker symbol HYLN. And as a reminder, Hyliion wants to become a leading provider of electrified powertrain solutions. And we are going to try to unpack what this means for Hyliion in this market. I actually believe that this point is far too often and too much overlooked. And that most people totally underestimate what it takes to become an original equipment manufacturer, in terms of industry knowledge and expertise, as well as all of the capital required to get to the point of volume production and the manufacturing constraints around it. But as a recap first, in the last episode, we had a good overview of the company itself, the team behind it, the products, and how they are planning to disrupt this industry. We also talked briefly about their financial position. And if you have missed the first episode, go check it out right now and come back to this video later on. Today for part 2, I want to share a few insights about the market, being the Class 8 truck market or the RNG1. I will also touch on the competition, current and future, and see how the legislation is going to shape this industry. Next time, we will conclude this series with the stock performance, doing some high-level technical analysis as well as more fundamental analysis on the stock price prospects, and trying to understand what opportunities lie ahead for current investors. So as usual, stay tuned in the following weeks for more content. And without further ado, let's talk about the market. The market we are going to focus on today is the commercial vehicle market, and more precisely the heavy-duty or Class 8 truck market. But first, as a disclaimer, I am not from this industry. I am not a driver and don't know any drivers, and I'm not working for any companies attached to this industry. So most of the content will be based on research, me talking or listening to people from the industry, and my personal interpretation of what the industry is. The first thing to understand, in my opinion, is the diversity of the market. Each country and more extensively region will have their own needs and expectations from the commercial trucks. And this has shaped over time some differences that can have an impact on the products being developed. And those differences are even reflected on the look of the trucks. So for example, here's an American truck. Here's a European one. And here's a Chinese one. Now this being said, it doesn't mean that everything is different about them. Of course not. But I guess what I'm trying to convey here is that differences will have to be taken into consideration when looking at the overall market and Hyliion's capability to expand internationally. Now, in terms of the size of the market, we have to differentiate two specific ones for Hyliion: the new truck sales market and the retrofitting one. In NAFTA, so North America, and Europe alone, we are talking about 290,000 new trucks sold per year, and with an approximate 9 years life cycle, that's more than 2.5 million trucks on the road for each region. When looking at the rest of the world, we are going to exclude figures from China because it is a big market, but extremely hard to penetrate for Western OEMs, which are going to be Hyliion's future partners. And despite not using China's data, we will still be talking about 364,000 brand new trucks sold every year, and more than 3 million on the road. So, the total market for brand new trucks worldwide is close to 1 million every year, with almost 9 million already out there. This figure is important in the context of Hyliion Hybrid EX system being available for retrofitting. As much as longer term, the system can be installed on brand new truck, in the short term, the retrofitting market could be a tremendous opportunity. When converting those numbers into potential revenues, and assuming here that we focus the ERX sales on brand new trucks, and the Hybrid EX on retrofits only, we are talking about a yearly total addressable market close to $100 billion for the ERX, and replacement market close to $250 billion for the hybrid. And when looking at NAFTA alone, we are still talking about $30 billion year-over-year revenue opportunity and $75 billion for the replacement market. So a huge market for Hyliion to bite into. And before we move to the OEM landscape, I also want to emphasize one key aspect of the Class 8 tractor truck market, and that's the usage profile. Day cabs are designed for short-haul operations and will typically come back to base at the end of the day. Sleeper cabs are designed for long-haul operations, and the driver will typically be hoteling at the end of his shift. If you remember in our first episode, we have mentioned that the Hybrid EX savings were partially due to the integrated APU, and that's in a sleeper cab configuration that those savings will be generated. However, there is other use cases that we haven't talked about, like the one where the truck is going to start and stop often. Here, the regenerative braking coupled with electric motors will be perfect to improve fuel efficiency of the vehicle. So what is the proportion for each configuration of cabs sold every year? Well, we are talking about an approximate 40-60 split between the two. And keep this figure in mind, because we will go back to it when we talk about legislation later on. When looking at OEM percentage market shares in the USA alone, and that's where we want to be focused on right now, because this is Hyliion's first addressable market, Freightliner, a brand from the Daimler Group, is representing almost 40% of the US market. PACCAR, with Kenworth and Peterbilt, represents another 30%. And if you add Volvo with their 18%, you are already talking about almost 90% of the market. So the Class 8 truck market in the US is dominated by 3 major companies and their respective brands. As of today, we know that Hyliion has worked closely with Volvo to spec a chassis for the hybrid product line. Despite this not being an official partnership, we know that a relationship has been built already between the two companies. Similarly, Peterbilt has been working closely with Hyliion. The Hypertruck ERX demonstration units are based on the Peterbilt 579 Epic chassis. So already, Hyliion is demonstrating some relationship being developed with key players in the industry. Looking briefly into the European market, which is believed to be the next market for Hyliion once they are more established in the US, we can see that the market is more balanced between different players. We can find again Daimler at the top of the list, but this time with their brand Mercedes at almost 20% of the market share. However, when looking from a mother company point of view, Traton is the leader with their brand MAN at 16% and Scania at 14%. The other brands hover between 10 and 15% for the likes of DAF, owned by PACCAR, Volvo, Iveco and Renault. So the market is more diverse, and extensively for Hyliion, this can also mean harder to penetrate. Or to be more accurate, harder to grow the market share, because this would mean partnering with more OEMs compared to the USA. However, if Hyliion can leverage the current relationships with PACCAR and Volvo already built in the US and use those relationships to penetrate the European market, so DAF and Volvo in Europe, this could be a great play for Hyliion. So watch this space on this one. And now that we have a better understanding of the OEM landscape, I think it is worth trying to understand the industry as a whole and the key players. And first, we need to remember that there is a final customer somewhere. Someone that needs something, whatever the something is, to be moved from one location to another. I don't want to oversimplify it, but in its essence, that's the fundamental need of the customers. And to be satisfied, the customer will expect to have it done at a specific date, by a specific time, at a specific cost, meeting some criteria around safety, quality, and now more than ever, environmental impact. The end customer can have their own fleet, or sometimes use the service of a transportation and logistics company. For example, Werner, Ryder, Agility are transportation and logistics companies providing a service to an end customer. Then you have your OEMs that will build the trucks that allow us to deliver the service. And for those that doubt it, it is extremely hard to build a product like a truck from the ground up, like extremely hard. I know that some people look at Tesla and think that because of their success, anybody can come and build a product as complex as a car and be successful. But Tesla is an exception. And most new companies trying to become an OEM will fail. I could make a full episode on this, but for now, let's stay humble and realize that what took sometimes decades to build is not a simple copy-paste type of exercise for new players. Also, we should remember that trucks don't drive themselves, and that besides of having intense loyalty to the different brands in the truck driving community, there is a massive driver shortage in the US and other parts of the world that gives drivers a strong voice when it comes to new technology adoption, let alone new OEMs. Then we also have the mod centers that will be a bridge between OEMs and fleet owners. Often, fleet owners with specific needs will leverage the mod centers that are often very close to the OEM assembly lines to prepare the trucks and be equipped with specific equipments or be modified. This can go from electronics to APU to chassis modification or even engine and fuel system installs. Not only the mod centers provide the service, but are also part of the maintenance network, and they work on brand new trucks or in the aftermarket space. And then you have the suppliers that we like to refer as tiers. A tier 1 supplier will directly provide the OEM or mod centers. Tier 2 supplier will directly supply the tier 1. Tier 3 supplies the tier 2, and so on and so forth. And we will refer to this as a supply chain. So for example, Hyliion supplies the hybrid EX system to an OEM, tier 1 supplier. Toshiba supplies the battery cells to Hyliion, tier 2 supplier in this specific example. Toshiba will source the raw material inside the cells from another supplier, tier 3. You get the idea. And the reason for me to depict this current value chain is in order to jump into Hyliion's business model that I particularly like. Hyliion is not trying to break the current value chain established over the years into those different players in this industry. Instead, Hyliion is trying to insert themselves in the middle of this value chain while providing value to most stakeholders. And before we move on, another information that I wanted to put forward is that up to 95% of current Class 8 trucks are powered by diesel, the rest being compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas or other alternative fuels. So the market is absolutely dominated by diesel trucks. However, everyone knows in the industry that electrification is coming and has been preparing for it. So let's see how this transition can happen. If we look at a company like Hyliion, which is considered a tier 1 supplier, that's where the biggest disruption will occur. And when I'm talking about disruption here, I'm more thinking about negative impact on the current players and not so much about the change itself, because we know that the change is coming. The idea is how much negative impact the change can have on the current value chain. So Hyliion is going to displace some current tier 1 suppliers, but then should have a moderate impact on the supply chain that is already transitioning towards electrification anyway. When it comes to mod centers, Hyliion business plan is to actually leverage the capability and expertise to assemble the products, as well as support the aftermarket, so little disruption to them here in my opinion. For the OEMs, the idea will be to work with the different powertrain providers, in this case Hyliion, but still do what they do best, which is assembling chassis. So moderate disruption here, the fleet owners and end customers will still be working with their favorite brands and current networks. Just the gut of the trucks will differ, so little to no disruption here for them. And to a certain extent, Hyliion is not the only player in this space. Companies like Rightspeed or Excel Fleet are using a similar business model. Probably the bigger competitor for Hyliion in this space is going to be Cummins. But as of today, Cummins doesn't really have a rounded product offering when it comes to electrification for Class 8 trucks, in my opinion. And then we have the big disruptors that are trying to become the next OEMs, the likes of Tesla, Nikola, Hyliion, or Bezos. You will notice here that none of those names appeared in the OEM sales list we have seen before, because there are new players. So for those companies to sell trucks, it means they have to get a share of the market from current OEMs and displace them. This is obviously a big disruption for the current OEMs, which in turn means disruption for the end customers and fleet owners that will have to deal with new companies altogether. As far as I know, mod centers aren't leveraged here, so big disruption too. Finally, the supply chain will be impacted more or less depending on the powertrain solutions picked by those new OEMs. And here, I'm not trying to say that this can't happen, but people need to realize that this is a business-to-business environment and that relationships and trust built over time goes a very long way when it comes to decision making. Finally, we are going to see the OEM-driven solutions, kind of baked in-house. And here, we are going to be in a situation really similar to the top row. The main difference being a top-down approach to change versus a bottom-up approach. So either the supplier is pushing the solution into the OEM's hands, bottom-up, or the OEMs are pulling a solution out of the suppliers, top-down approach. And I believe, either way, that's what is going to succeed in the long term. Not trying to reinvent the wheel, but trying to build on the existing value chain and improving what needs to be improved. OEMs are already developing their own solutions for what it is, and some suppliers, like Hyliion, are also trying to create an off-the-shelf type of solutions for OEMs that can only add this to their current offering. And so let's understand the current offering and the competitive landscape. As of today, most players are packed into the short-haul market. And if you remember, the short-haul market is only 40% of the total Class 8 truck market, which, don't get me wrong, is still a decent-sized market, but with a lot of competition right now. And then you have the long-haul space, 60% of the overall market, and literally nobody in this space apart from Hyliion. And why is that? Well, different factors, but first, the weaknesses of the technologies, then the lack of infrastructure, and finally, the higher fuel price. That's the three hurdles that nobody can solve altogether yet, apart from Hyliion with the Hypertruck ERX. If we look at BEV for long haul first, and I insist here, I'm talking about long haul trucking, not short haul, long haul. The only player that we know of as of today is Tesla. Every other BEV trucks will have to be short haul because the range is far too small and the recharge time far too long for long haul trucking. Then, assuming that Tesla can pull this off with their semi and its expected 500 miles of range using their new 4680 battery cells, this will still require infrastructures to be built for long haul. And you will still end up with a massive battery pack, so less payload. So not something that will be totally impossible in the future. But how long is that going to take before we get to this point where BEV is a viable option for long haul? I'll let everyone have their own opinion on the matter. I personally have mine. Then you have fuel cell or FCEV, which will be more forgiving for the range and the weight of the battery by leveraging the energy density of hydrogen. And this architecture is actually really similar to the Hypertruck ERX architecture. By the way, if you remember, the Hypertruck will eventually go towards FCEV. But to go back to this current offering, you carry with you a fuel that has greater energy density than a battery and extract the energy from the fuel to turn it into electricity on board to either recharge the batteries or put the truck in motion. We even have some companies in this space specialized in using gravity to get the truck in motion. But I diverge here. So to go back to hydrogen, this could be a really promising source of energy for clean transportation. But the lack of infrastructure is still an issue. And worse than that, in my opinion, the lack of green hydrogen is a problem, and the lack of cheap green hydrogen even worse. For this technology to take off, we need to be able to produce clean hydrogen at scale and for a price that can compete with diesel at least. And we are really far from that yet. And for people to get a feel for where current trucks can refuel and the infrastructure around, here's the map for hydrogen fuel stations for Class 8 trucks. So 48 public stations available and 58 planned, plus the 26 privately owned, that's 132 in total, and pretty much all in California, which we have to recognize as being a start, but fairly low for mass adoption of the technology today and extremely localized in one area. When it comes to CNG stations, we actually have 680 public stations available, 11 planned and 570 privately owned ones, stations like utility-owned, federal or state government, etc., for a total of 1,261 stations in total. And across the country, which is quite important when you are talking about long-haul transportation. When it comes to electric chargers for Class 8 truck, I could not find any trusted source of information, and as much as I believe some already exist for private usage, I do not believe that any have been developed for public access. If you have any information on that matter, feel free to drop something into the comment section. So where do we go from here? I've tried to share with you the size of the market, what entities makes the market and how they interact with each other. I've tried to explain how Hylion's business model differs from some of the competition, and we've talked about the competition and some of the hurdles that will have to be overcome over the next few years to actually become a viable solution. And now, I want to add the last piece of the puzzle, which, in my opinion, brings the whole story together, and this is legislation. On the 25th of June 2020, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, adopted the final rule for new standards that require the sale of zero-emission heavy-duty trucks, HDTs, starting with the 2024 model year. The regulation, first of its kind in the world, to require manufacturers to sell increasing percentages of zero-emission trucks, is expected to reduce the life cycle emission of greenhouse gas, eliminate tailpipe emissions of air pollutants, and foster a market for zero-emission and near-zero-emission HDTs. So here, we know that California, which as a state has a tremendous influence on the rest of the world, but more particularly in America, is defining the expectations that OEMs will have to start selling zero emission and near zero emission heavy duty trucks in order to not be penalized financially. And this graph represents the expectations set by CARB over the next decade and beyond for OEMs to sell ZEV and NZEV trucks for different classes of commercial trucks. Today, we are obviously interested in the Class 8 tractor trucks. And what can you see? Is that by 2024, at least 5% of the OEM sales will have to be ZEV. This threshold will increase year over year until plateauing at 40% by 2032. One key point here to understand: failing to meet the target set by CARB will mean financial penalties for the OEM, which could be under the form of ZEV credits having to be bought from another manufacturers. So not only OEMs will be better off not being below the target, or what we call in deficit, but could also generate another stream of revenue if they were to be above the target and capable of selling those credits to other manufacturers in need for them. Think about how much money Tesla was able to generate through similar credits for passenger cars, and you will get the idea. But I want to go back to the magic number 40%. And you may be wondering, why would the numbers reach a maximum of 40% by 2032 and beyond, while everything else keeps increasing towards the ultimate 100% electrified fleet's target? I said to you previously to bear in mind the 40-60 ratio between short and long-haul transportation. And here's the reason why. According to a document from CARB called Updated Analysis Regarding Increased Manufacturer Zero Emission Vehicle Sales Requirements, dated 28th of April 2020, we can read that Class 7 and 8 tractor sales estimates indicates 55 to 60% of tractor sales are in a sleeper cab configuration. Sleeper cab tractors are generally used for line haul applications, which involves long distance interstate travel. Because these vehicles travel long distances and infrequently return to a single base, they are more challenging in terms of vehicle capabilities and require a new infrastructure network nationally. Then says, for this reason, staff proposes to keep the Class 7 and 8 tractor ZEV percentage requirement flat at 40% of total tractor sale instead of continuing to ramp up the requirements. Staff will continue to evaluate the developments of ZE tractor technology and infrastructure network development. The board can adjust the requirements in the future when it is determined to be appropriate. So what do we learn here? CARB is basically saying that until 2032, so 10 years from here, they are expecting zero long-haul trucks to be sold in California. None. And that's despite challenging every other single class of commercial vehicles. CARB is still, as of today, incapable of challenging the Class 8 long-haul truck industry because they believe there is absolutely no solution available as of today and will still be the case by 2032 and beyond. Then of course they finish the statement by saying that they will review the figures once appropriate, but for now there is absolutely no expectations around long haul. None. One last bit of information. In order to generate ZEV credits, the trucks have to generate zero tailpipe emissions. That's the basic fundamental rule. So technically, and despite being better for the environment than most solutions, the Hypertruck ERX running on RNG would not qualify for ZEV credits. However, the ERX is capable of running on a pure battery for as much as 75 miles and is therefore considered, because being coupled with natural gas, a near zero electric vehicle, or NZEV. And this in turn allows the ERX to claim 75% of one ZEV credit. And this is big, huge, absolutely massive for Hyliion and their relationship with OEMs. Besides, the ZEV credits are going to have a factor attached to it, from 0.8 for smaller trucks like Class 2B or 3, to 2.5 for Class 7 and 8, which means the bigger the truck, the more important it is to meet the target, which basically means that one ZEV Class 8 truck sold will generate 2.5 ZEV credits, where one ZEV Class 3 truck will generate 0.8 ZEV credits. But an ERX, being a NZEV and claiming 75% of a Class 8 ZEV credit, will generate almost 2 ZEV credits per unit sold for the OEM, or 1.875 ZEV credits to be perfectly accurate. Look, I hope it wasn't confusing. But what you need to remember, the big trucks are going to generate the most ZEV credits. And in long haul, there is no trucks as of today capable of generating anything apart from Hyliion. So now that we have all the pieces of the jigsaw, I would like to put them together for you. First of all, OEMs have to meet the overall ZEV credit targets and can already, by the way, start stacking them up as of today towards 2024 when the regulation officially starts. CARB hasn't set ZEV expectations for long haul yet, and I'm not expecting them to do so anytime soon. Long haul market is 60%, 60, of overall market and is therefore a massive opportunity for ZEV credits. Then there is no trucks capable of doing long haul and generate ZEV credits apart from the ERX with its 75% ZEV credits for Class 8. Finally, ZEV credits can either be an opportunity for an OEM or a financial burden. So my conclusion is that OEMs are going to absolutely fight over to get the ERX technology into their trucks in order to generate easily ZEV credits. Hyliion, being a supplier, will then have created a competitive landscape between OEMs, because once one OEM embraces this technology, other OEMs will have to follow suit in order to not lose on the ZEV credits war to come. But then, maybe we are still underestimating something. What if fleet owners don't want this technology and aren't interested? The OEMs aren't going to force them to buy them in the end. And that's where you guys realize that one last piece of the puzzle was still hidden from you. And here it is. The ACT regulations that we've just talked about is going to be followed by the ACT fleets regulations, expected in 2022. So just around the corner really. And as we speak, workshops are being held to progress this regulation, which is now referred to as the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulations, or ACF regulations. We currently have some details about the proposal, and you can go check it out on the official CARB's website, but not being approved yet. I would rather, personally, not go in more depth into it right now. What we need to understand though is that a similar approach with similar targets is being taken to guide fleet owners towards cleaner technology, and that the Hypertruck ERX is going to keep its unique position, being capable to generate a lot of ZEV credits where no other solution can. And here you have it. A solution with the lowest cost of ownership, the lowest GHG emission profile capable of net carbon negative, absolutely no competition in its category for years to come, and all that while generating a minimum amount of disruption in the industry. And can Hyliion fail in their quest? Of course they can. But what if they don't? And what if they manage to pull this off? In our next episode, the last one of our series, we will see what the stock is telling us and what upside potential this company has if successful in the future. And this will conclude our Diamond in the Rough series. And don't forget, patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. Jean-Jacques Rousseau.